I was riding my bike last night through the West Village, and barriers were going up, these barricades that prevent you from going from sidewalk to the street, and I had to weave all around them. And I was reminded that tomorrow, on Sunday, there's a big event going on in the West Village, specifically on the street I was on, Christopher Street, the Pride Parade, which is a very big event here in New York. And I, unfortunately, do not like crowds. They give me huge anxiety, like being trapped in a street on a sidewalk with lots of people and not being able to move. So I avoid crowds like that whenever possible. I need air. I need to move around. But it is something that makes me proud to live in a city, at least, where that can happen safely. And so this morning I was sitting out and having coffee and reading my current book, which I pick up all the time, Virginia Woolf's journals. I've been doing this for years. It's one of the in-between books that I read, in between other things, whenever I feel like it. I'm sitting there on the sidewalk, having coffee here in my neighborhood, away from the crowds. And this happens very often. And it doesn't even surprise me anymore, where I feel like I'm being spoken to by the ghost, by the ghost of the person that I have invested so much time in, like Virginia Woolf, like Sargent, like Maybelle Carter, all these people that for years I have been in such admiration of their skill. That's what usually draws me to them. And it causes a deep dive, and this deep dive lasts for years, where I become more and more familiar with their lives and their work, and it serves as a huge inspiration to me to learn about how they did what they did. I mine that. I use that in my own life. So today I was sitting there and I'm just going through the journal leisurely, and I come to a passage from Saturday, the 10th of November, 1928. And this passage is about a controversy that is taking place in London at the time, about a book called The Well of Loneliness. It's a novel by a poet named Radcliffe Hall, whose original birth name I think is like Marguerite Antoine Radcliffe Hall. Born a woman, became a poet, wrote this book about I believe it's about a relationship between two women. And the book comes out, and there's a lot of controversy around the book. It is deemed indecent and obscene because of what it graphically portrays. I have not read the book. So earlier in Virginia's journal, she mentions that she read the book and it was not great. And this is all in the privacy of her personal journals. She's not saying this stuff publicly. On Saturday, the 10th of November, Virginia Woolf recounts what happened the previous day. It was a court case. And I'm going to read the footnote to this. Jonathan Cape and a London bookseller had been summoned by a public prosecutor to show cause why Radcliffe Hall's novel, The Well of Loneliness, should not be destroyed as obscene. So there was the threat that this book had to be destroyed, seized and destroyed, because it was not appropriate for the public to read. The case was heard on the 9th of November at Bow Street, before the Chief Magistrate, Sir Charles Biron, 1863 to 1940, who ruled that the question of obscenity was one for him alone to determine, and that evidence as to literary merit was inadmissible. His judgment was delivered the following week on 16th of November, when he made an order for the book to be seized and destroyed. An appeal was entered and heard at London Sessions on 14th of December, when it was dismissed. the court concluding that the book was disgusting and obscene and prejudicial to the morals of the community. So, Virginia Woolf, who had relations with women and recorded that in her private journals and openly discussed it with her close friends, and even her husband was aware of it, writes about attending the trial the day before. Virginia Woolf was there in the courtroom. So she talks about some things that morning, and then she moves on to the trial. What is more interesting, and Lord knows this is true, I am speaking coolly and faithfully, is the trial yesterday at Bow Street. We were all packed in by 10:30. The door at the top of the court opened. In stepped the debonair, distinguished magistrate. We all rose. He bowed, took his seat under the Lion and the Unicorn, and then proceeded. Something like a Harley Street specialist investing a case, all black and white, tie-pin, clean-shaven, wax-colored, and carved in that light like ivory. He was ironical at first, raised his eyebrows and shrugged. Later, I was impressed by the reason of the law, its astuteness, its formality. Here have we evolved a very remarkable fence. Here have we evolved a very remarkable fence between us and barbarity, something commonly recognized, half humbug and ceremony, therefore. When they pulled out calf-bound books and read old phrases, I thought this, and the bowing and scraping made me think it. But in these banks runs a live stream. What is obscenity? What is literature? What is the difference between the subject and the treatment? In what cases is evidence allowable? This last, to my relief, was decided against us. We could not be called as experts in obscenity, only in art, because there are a bunch of writers in the audience, and they can testify against this novel being destroyed on artistic merit. But they are not allowed, the court does not want their opinion on what is deemed obscene. So Desmond, who had got under the palanquin where he looked too indifferent, too calm, too completely at his ease to be natural, was only asked his qualifications and then, not allowed to answer the obscene question, was dismissed. In the hall, I talked to Lady Trowbridge, who used to sculpt, and last time we met was a tea party as children in Montpellier Square, and John. Lady Trowbridge was partners, like romantic partners, with Radcliffe Hall, who is now called John. So the two of them are there at the courtroom. John, lemon yellow, tough, stringy, exacerbated. Their costs run into 4 figures, she said, and Leonard thinks this heralds a subscription. After lunch, we heard an hour more, and then the magistrate, increasingly deliberate and courteous, said he would read the book again and give judgment next Friday at 2, on the pale, tepid, vapid book which lay damp and slab all about the court. That's Radcliffe Hall's book, what she's referring to. And I lost my little Roman brooch, and that is the end of this great day so far. A curious, brown-topped, lighted scene, very stuffy, policemen at the doors, matrons passing through, an atmosphere quite decent and formal of adult people. I kind of couldn't believe that I was reading that today, something that is so relevant to what has been on my mind, because last week I put out a video about visiting the Met and meeting a curator there, Stephanie Herdrich, and having the great privilege to look at watercolor paintings by John Singer Sargent with my watercolor teacher, Marcelo. And while discussing these works, the topic of his sexuality came up. I brought it up. I'll just admit that I brought it up. And I felt it was important to discuss this because I felt it was part of what fueled his work, and Stephanie seemed to agree with me. And I'm going to break this fourth wall a little bit, which I don't really do, but I was scrolling through the comments and addressing concerns, like questions that people had about watercolor or whatever, and in the comments there were quite a few that mentioned that I should focus on the artist's work and not talk about his sexuality or speculate and that there's no evidence about it. Some people said that it was crude of me to talk about sex. That has no place in this. And I brought, it just, it irritated me. It irritated me, and I know it shouldn't irritate me because I should rise above it. But it irritated me because this is the sort of thing that has allowed someone, or prevented someone from living the life that they should be allowed to live. That act of silencing someone and putting on a lens of something being crude and gross is what has happened throughout history, and what this Pride Parade is all about. It's about saying we should be allowed to live however we want to live. And this is the thing that I want to bring up. The term sexuality is a little misleading, because in discussing Sargent's sexuality, my point was not to illustrate who he wanted to sleep with. My point is about love. Someone's sexuality dictates who they are allowed to love. And that ability to love somebody else is afforded to many people. Many people who aren't criticized for a man loving a woman or a woman loving a man. That is allowed to happen. So what is happening here when I'm being criticized for discussing an artist's sexuality from the past is that I'm actually not allowed to talk about who he's allowed to love. And the argument might be made, as it was, that what does that have to do with his art? Well, let me tell you what it has to do with his art. When you buy a wedding dress, when you buy your flower arrangements for your wedding, when you hire an interior designer, when you buy a painting, many of those things were designed and made by people who are gay. And in order to create something beautiful that moves you artistically, visually, as Sargent's patrons were moved, that work is infused with someone's ability to love. They love their work. It is what I am doing in these videos. If you like my videos, if you enjoy watching me, and I'm very grateful for the praise that I have been given over the last few years through the wonderful comments in almost every single one of my video, I do this because I like to do it, and I'm able to share my love for my life because I have been allowed to live a life where I can express all of the love I have in me for whoever I want. And that is a privilege that was not afforded on Sargent. It's a privilege that is not afforded on many people. And the reason I bring it up in videos like the Sargent video and videos like this, it's not to fight, because I don't want to fight. There's enough fighting in the world. There are enough people fighting, and I am grateful for the fighting. It's only because of the fighting that I'm able to live this way. It's only because of what happened on Christopher Street that was violent, that was fighting, that today I can walk around and live the way I want to live. I recognize that, and I appreciate it, and I'm grateful for it. But I am not a fighter, and I don't want to fight. So I do what I can in my way, and my way of doing it is by spreading love. And when I speak of something like someone's sexuality, someone like Sargent, it is to help people. And if you don't agree with it and you can't understand it, that's fine. But I bring it up for the person who is maybe struggling with their identity, who is maybe like me when I was a lot younger, didn't really have any voices speaking to me that encouraged me to be who I am. And that's why I'm doing this. Let's go back to Virginia Woolf. Virginia Woolf was very good friends with someone who was also a writer named E.M. Forster. And in her journals, she refers to him as Morgan. That was how she affectionately, that's what he was called, Morgan. E.M. Forster wrote many novels that were turned into movies, actually, like A Room with a View, A Passage to India, and this novel, which was turned into a movie with Hugh Grant called Maurice, was written by Ian Forster, I think in like 1918 or something, but it wasn't published in his lifetime because he knew that it wouldn't be allowed, like this court case about Radcliffe Hall's book. So Maurice was published after Ian Forster died. And shortly before Ian Forster died, in reviewing Maurice, he wrote something down. He wrote an author's note, a terminal note. And at the end of the terminal note, written in 1960, there's a heading of homosexuality. And Ian Forster writes, "Note in conclusion on a word hitherto unmentioned in this book. Since Maurice was written, there has been a change in the public attitude here, the change from ignorance and terror to familiarity and contempt. It is not the change towards which Edward Carpenter had worked," a friend of his. "He had hoped for the generous recognition of an emotion and for the reintegration of something primitive into the common stock. And I, though less optimistic, had supposed that knowledge would bring understanding. We had not realized that what the public really loathes in homosexuality is not the thing itself, but having to think about it. If it could be slipped into our midst unnoticed or legalized overnight by a decree in small print, there would be few protests. Unfortunately, it can only be legalized by Parliament, and members of Parliament are obliged to think or to appear to think." When I read those irritating comments on the Sargent video about homosexuality and criticizing me for mentioning it or bringing it up, this is what came to mind. It is exactly what he wrote in here. People don't want to think about it, and that's why they're irritated and upset about it, to the point that they go in and leave a comment about how I shouldn't be talking about it. And here it is. Here it is right here. Things only change because certain people allow themselves to think about it. Certain people who are not homosexuals, who are in power, push themselves to think about what this is doing to other people's lives. And the fact that it does come down not to sex, not to anything crude, but to love. And how unfair it is to judge who someone should be allowed to love. So, my ghost spoke to me this morning, and I think my ghost knew in her day that it was too early. It was too early to try to be so bold in her speech about this subject that she could understand. But maybe the reason why I read this today was because the time is right for me to speak up about it in my own way, the way that I feel can do some good and can change something for someone out there who is watching this and who is struggling. I did too. And if my words can help you, know that when you live your truth, despite what people might think, despite what a religion says, despite what even the law says, because laws and religion are created by people, you will be free. And there are other people out there who will metaphorically hold your hand and support you. You know, the irony of this irritation, I read these comments and they get under my skin and they irritate me and sometimes infuriate me, and I am for a moment filled with rage. And then I calm myself down by going to my anchors, my ancient anchors. And one of my ancient anchors is a visual. It's the ancient statue of Lord Shiva as Lord of the Dance of Nataraja, posed like this. And around him is a circle of fire, which symbolizes a circle that has no beginning and end, which is what Lord Shiva symbolizes. the creator and the destroyer. The body is created, and then upon death it's turned into ash, which Lord Shiva is covered in. And it's a certain part of that image of Nataraja. It's what he is standing on. One foot is raised in the air, and it is believed that this cosmic dance exists while the universe is still moving. And when Lord Shiva puts down his right foot, the universe will end. His left foot, however, is on the ground, but it's not directly touching the ground. It's actually on top of a little dwarf. And the dwarf's name is Apasmara. And Apasmara is actually a demon. And Apasmara represents the root of all evil, which is ignorance. That is my solace of when I get angry. I have to remind myself of that little dwarf that is the root of all evil. It's ignorance. And that's where these comments come from. They come from ignorance. And then the second thing that I do to let it out is I hear in my voice, in my head, the words of another person that we all know, this man. And I hear in my head, "Forgive them, Father, for they know not what they do." That's the irony of this, is that's what I hear, and then I actually do it. I forgive them because they actually don't know. And it's only by attempting to get rid of ignorance, by wanting to get rid of ignorance, that things change.